On January 24th, 2026, Microsoft did something they've done only a handful of times in Windows history. They released a second emergency patch in the same week to fix Windows 11 problems caused by their first emergency patch, which was supposed to fix problems caused by their regular January security update. Let that sink in. 3 updates in 11 days, each one claiming to solve the disaster created by the one before it. And, for millions of Windows 11 users, that second emergency patch, KB507-8127, still didn't fix everything. Some users found new problems appearing that weren't there before. By the time you finish watching this, you'll understand what broke, why the second emergency patch failed to solve it, and what this reveals about the future of Windows security. Let's rewind to where this nightmare actually started, because you need to understand the full scope of failure. On January 13, 2026, Microsoft released their monthly Patch Tuesday update, KB507-4109, to Windows 11 machines running versions 23H2, 24H2, and 25H2. The official changelog looked completely standard. Security improvements, system stability enhancements, bug fixes for known issues, corporate language that users had seen every month for years. Microsoft's documentation described it as addressing critical vulnerabilities, particularly in how Windows handled system permissions and file access controls. The update was classified as important, meaning most users received it automatically overnight. For enterprise environments, this rolled out across thousands of machines simultaneously through Windows Update for Business. Everything about this update appeared routine. Microsoft even highlighted in their release notes that they'd focused on improving system reliability and security posture. Within 24 hours, that claim would become darkly ironic. But by January 14th, Microsoft's support forums were flooding with panic. Users reported that clicking the shutdown button did absolutely nothing. The start menu would close, but the system kept running. Others found remote desktop completely broken, locking IT administrators out of servers they managed remotely. Hibernation failed. Outlook crashed on startup for anyone with PST files in OneDrive or Dropbox. And then the truly bizarre problems emerged. Notepad wouldn't launch. Snipping tool through error code, gaming hardware control software like Alienware Command Center and Asus Armory Crate became completely unresponsive. These weren't niche applications. These were native Windows tools and major manufacturer software failing simultaneously. Security researchers immediately began analyzing the update's code. What they discovered was a fundamental flaw in how KB507-4109 modified user account control permissions. The update had introduced conflicts that broke how applications accessed system resources. When programs tried to save files to cloud-synced folders, the permission checks failed, silently. When hardware control software attempted to access driver-level functions, those calls were blocked. The shutdown process itself was being interrupted by background services that could no longer properly signal they were ready to terminate. Microsoft's first emergency response came on January 17, 2026. Just 4 days after the disaster began, they released an out-of-band patch, meaning this couldn't wait for the next scheduled monthly update. The term out-of-band is Microsoft's way of saying we messed up so badly we can't wait 30 days to fix it. The emergency patch notes acknowledged issues with remote desktop, hibernation, and shutdown behaviors. But here's what they didn't mention: the application crashes, the cloud storage conflicts, the hardware control software failures. Microsoft fixed part of the problem while ignoring documented issues that thousands of users were reporting across Reddit, Twitter, and their own support forums. Independent testing revealed that the first emergency patch only addressed the remote desktop authentication failures and some of the hibernation problems. The shutdown button still didn't work reliably. Notepad still crashed. The permission conflicts with the cloud storage remain. And for some users, the first emergency patch introduced a new problem: increased boot times, with systems taking 30 to 45 seconds longer to start than before any of this began. Which brings us to January 24th, 2026, and the second emergency patch. Microsoft released 3 separate updates simultaneously. This time, the patch notes were more explicit, addressing issues where applications become unresponsive when opening or saving files to cloud storage services, including OneDrive, Dropbox, and Outlook PST files. Resolves crashes affecting Notepad, snipping, Tool, and other native Windows applications. Microsoft support documentation now listed 12 specific applications known to be affected, triple what they'd acknowledged in the first emergency patch. The company pushed these updates through Windows Update with high priority classification, meaning they would install automatically even on systems that had paused regular updates. This was Microsoft essentially forcing the fix onto every Windows machine, because the alternative, leaving systems in their current broken state, was even worse. But here's where the second emergency patch story gets truly disturbing. Security researcher Kevin Beaumont ran the complete update sequence on a clean Windows 11 installation, documenting every step. His findings, published on his widely followed security blog, revealed that KB5078-127 fixed some problems while creating others. The shutdown button now worked for most users, but only after a 15 to 20-second delay that hadn't existed before any updates. File saving to OneDrive mostly worked, but occasional access denied errors still appeared randomly for files that users definitely had permission to access. Snipping tool launched successfully, but some users reported it now crashed when trying to save screenshots to cloud folders. The permission system Microsoft had tried to fix twice was still fundamentally broken, just in different ways. And Beaumont discovered something even more concerning. The second emergency patch had weakened security controls as a side effect of trying to restore functionality. The updated permission system now uses fallback authentication that bypasses certain user account control checks when the primary method fails. In practical terms, this means processes that should require administrator approval might succeed with standard user privileges under specific timing conditions. This creates potential privilege escalation vulnerabilities that didn't exist before the entire patch disaster started. Privacy regulators across Europe took notice, though no formal investigations have been announced yet. The United Kingdom's Information Commissioner's Office had previously warned Microsoft about insufficient testing protocols for updates affecting data accessibility. Under GDPR, system stability is classified as a security requirement because unstable systems increase data breach risks. When users are forced to perform unsafe shutdowns because the proper shutdown process fails, there's a heightened risk of data corruption and incomplete deletion of temporary files containing sensitive information. When applications crash unpredictably, cached data may remain in memory or temporary storage longer than intended. The European Union Agency for Cybersecurity published guidance in 2024 emphasizing that update quality control is itself a cybersecurity obligation. Rushed emergency patches that introduced new vulnerabilities while fixing old ones violate the principle of security by design that EU regulations require. While Microsoft hasn't faced fines related to this specific incident, the pattern of inadequate testing before releasing updates to billions of users represents the kind of negligent data protection practice that regulators have been increasingly willing to penalize. Let's talk about what this means in human terms, not just technical specifications. Imagine you're a freelance graphic designer working from home. You rely on cloud storage to share project files with clients. The January update installs automatically overnight. The next morning, you open your design software to work on a client deadline, and every time you try to save your progress to OneDrive, the application freezes. Error 0x803F8001. You reboot. Same problem. You install the first emergency patch on January 17th. Now the save function works intermittently, failing randomly about 30% of the time. You install the second emergency patch on January 24th. Saves mostly work, but occasionally you get access denied errors for files you created yourself. You've lost hours of productivity across 11 days because Microsoft can't properly test updates before releasing them. Or consider a small medical practice. A doctor uses remote desktop to access patient records from home for after-hours consultations. KB 5074109 breaks remote desktop entirely, and the doctor can't access the system at all. The first emergency patch on January 17th partially restores access, but the connection times out randomly. The second emergency patch on January 24th finally stabilized the connection, but only after the practice had rescheduled appointments and sent patients to the emergency room because medical histories weren't accessible. These aren't hypothetical scenarios. These are the real-world consequences documented in support forms and IT help desk tickets. After the second emergency patch, Microsoft published an expanded knowledge base article acknowledging more failure modes than they'd initially admitted. But independent testing by multiple security researchers revealed problems Microsoft still hasn't publicly addressed. The technology journalist Ed Bott tested KB5078-127 across multiple hardware configurations and documented persistent issues. On systems with certain third-party antivirus software, the shutdown delay extends to over 30 seconds, and occasionally the shutdown process still fails completely, requiring a forced power-off. On laptops with BitLocker encryption enabled, the boot process after the second emergency patch sometimes triggers BitLocker recovery, requiring users to enter their 48-character recovery key just to access their own computers. On systems using non-Microsoft cloud storage services beyond OneDrive and Dropbox, like Box or Google Drive, the file access permission problems persist despite Microsoft's claims that the issue is resolved. And perhaps most troubling, the Windows Event Viewer on systems with all three updates installed shows repeated permission denial errors logged every few minutes, even when applications appear to be functioning normally. These background errors indicate the permission system is still failing constantly, but now it's failing silently with fallback methods masking the underlying problem. What makes this entire sequence of failures particularly inexcusable is Microsoft's testing infrastructure. The Windows Insider program exists specifically to catch these problems before they reach regular users. Updates progress through multiple testing rings, dev channel for experimental features, beta channel for near-final builds, and release preview channel for exact replicas of what will ship to the public. KB5074109 went through all of these phases. Hundreds of thousands of volunteer testers had this update on their systems for weeks before it released on January 13th, which means either the shutdown failures, application crashes, and permission conflicts didn't occur in testing despite affecting millions of users in production, or they did occur and Microsoft released the update anyway. Neither explanation is acceptable. Some Windows Insider participants reported on Microsoft's forums that they had experienced shutdown issues during the release preview phase, but their feedback was marked as under investigation and then ignored. The update shipped to everyone despite documented problems from the final testing phase. Here's what you need to do right now to protect your system. First, verify which updates you currently have installed. Open Settings, navigate to Windows Update, select Update History, and check for these specific KB numbers: KB5074109, KB5077744, and KB5078127 if you're on Windows 11 version 24H2 or 25H2. If you see KB5074109, but not the subsequent emergency patches, you absolutely need to install them because your system is in the worst possible state, broken with no fixes applied. Go to Windows Update and select Check for Updates. The emergency patches should appear automatically. Install them and restart. If you have all 3 updates installed and you're still experiencing shutdown delays, application crashes, or file access errors, you have a more difficult decision. You can uninstall the entire sequence by going to Update History, finding KB5074109, selecting Uninstall, and restarting. This removes all 3 patches and returns your system to its pre-January state. However, this also removes legitimate security fixes that were included in the original update, leaving you vulnerable to actual security threats. If you choose this path, you should immediately go to Windows Update, select Advanced Options, and pause updates for 5 weeks to prevent automatic reinstallation, while Microsoft hopefully resolves their quality control disaster. Here's an advanced step for technically comfortable users. The permission errors often leave traces in your system logs that can help identify which applications are still affected even if crashes aren't visible. Open Event Viewer by searching for it in the Start menu. Navigate to Windows Logs, then Application. Filter the current log for Event ID 1000, which logs application crashes. Look for entries dated after January 24th that mention error code 0x803F8001 or reference cloud storage paths. This will show you which programs are still failing silently in the background. You can also check Windows Logs, then System, and filter for Event ID 10016, which logs permission denial errors. If you see dozens or hundreds of these events per day after installing the second emergency patch, your permission system is still fundamentally broken despite Microsoft's claims. Document these with screenshots because if Microsoft releases a third emergency patch, you'll want evidence of ongoing problems. Your operating system is supposed to be an invisible infrastructure that just works. You shouldn't need to track KB numbers, parse event viewer logs, or make risk calculations about whether security updates are more dangerous than the vulnerabilities they claim to fix. But that's what Microsoft has forced Windows users to do. The January 2026 update disaster, culminating in a second emergency patch that still doesn't fully work, represents a complete breakdown of the quality assurance process that's supposed to protect users from this scenario. Microsoft proved they can develop and deploy patches in 4-day cycles when their reputation is on the line. But that just makes it more inexcusable that KB5074109 shipped with obvious system-breaking flaws in the first place. That's not normal, that's not acceptable, and accepting it as the new reality is exactly what they're counting on.